Welcome to the Orthogonal Bet, where we explore the weird and wonderful ideas that shape our world. It's a cabinet of curiosities for the ears and the mind. I'm your host, Samuel Arbesman, complexity scientist, author, and scientist in residence at Lux Capital. I'm pleased to have Kristoffer Tjalve join me again on the show. Kristoffer and I spoke last time about the poetic web and the delightful aspects of the internet. He has a new project called The Internet Phone Book, a physical book that lists personal websites, along with essays about the internet. After its first run, it is now available again as a reprint over at MetaLabel. I encourage listeners to check it out. Kristoffer and I spoke about the origins and nature of the Internet Phone Book, the feeling of the early web that it's trying to recapture, and what he learned when making this book. We also spoke about the internet as a, quote, underdeveloped ecosystem and what this means, organic software, ways of supporting the poetic web, and even what the world of the internet can learn from the world of books and print publishing. This was so much fun, and I had a fantastic time chatting with Kristoffer. Let's jump in. Kristoffer, welcome back to the Orthogonal Bet. It's good to be talking with you again.
Thank you, Sam. I'm so excited to be back here.
And you have a new project that you've been working on called The Internet Phone Book. And I happen to be in it, which is great. Although really everyone should be in the phone book. Maybe just start by explaining what is this Internet Phone Book?
Yeah, I'm very happy that you are in the phone book. I think actually I guess the first time I mentioned it outside of just myself and my friend that I was working with, it was to you when we recorded the first podcast. The phone book is a physical directory. So it's a printed book. It looks like this on the video.
Yep.
Now
here's
you cannot see it.
And here's my copy
amazing.
as well. Yeah, we got them both.
So it's a printed directory of people and their websites. We emphasize this like a personal directory. So I guess the color we chose is yellow, but probably it would have been more appropriate to do white if you kind of like play on the old phone books, because the white phone book was like the people's directory and the yellow ones were like the commercial. And in the end of the day, what we wanted to make a book with a lot of people and their websites, and then we wanted to distribute it around. And then we learned a lot of things along the way. Like phone books had a lot of phone numbers in them, for example.
Well, I remember you were saying that, right, you were initially excited, like, I have hundreds of people. And then you put it in the format of an actual phone book and you're like, oh, this is like 3 pages.
No, it was, I think we got like very quickly, we got hundreds. I think in the end, we got maybe 800 submissions. And then I think we put them into columns, and it was really like, it was not so many as we thought it was. Like we were quite like excited because like when we first got the idea, we thought like, okay, maybe we get like 200, 300 people to commit their websites. We'll put them in a book and we'll send it around. That's it. But then we got like a lot of submissions and we got even more excited. But yeah, we were quite naive. We didn't think about everything that would come out. So we learned to go with it. We kind of evolved it. We added essays. And we had different ideas like, okay, how do we make it a little bit thicker? Phone books kind of need to be a bit thick and a bit heavy. And it was more like a pamphlet or scene in the beginning. So we kind of like we iterated on the way and like we added pages and then learned about printing, which was another thing.
And taking a step back, like what was the origin of this project? Like, was it, because it's an interesting thing where like, it's the Internet Phone Book. You want to have lots and lots of people, but it's a physical directory. Like it feels almost kind of like harkening back to, I think there were books like very early on the web where it was like, okay, here's like just a book of interesting websites, or you have like the Whole Earth catalog. Were those some of the inspirations? Like what was the origin in terms of like thinking about, I want to put the internet and some really interesting websites on the internet, but into a physical book?
I think there are like inception story as such. It's like my friend Elliot that I did this book with. Elliot Cost is like a artist, developer, designer. He was visiting me here in Athens and we sat in a bookshop and we were just working on a project which was a map of the internet. And we were kind of discussing like, okay, it would be so nice that the things that we are creating kind of could live in this bookshop, because then it could meet people that are not so much into like this niche conversation of what is the poetic web, what is the indie web, but like how can you use the internet to kind of experiment with publishing, etc. So we was like, okay, it would be nice that we could actually make an artifact, probably a book, since we're in a bookshop, and we could place it here. And at that point, we kind of like, okay, it could be interesting if we made a phone book and we just made it with like all our friends and their websites, and then we could have it there. We would print it, we would place it in a few bookshops, and that would kind of be it. Along the way, then we'd actually learned a lot more about the origins of the early 90s and everything. And we learned that, it was a real thing, right? Like, so in the 90s, before social media, before even Yahoo and the indexes, like the directories, people were kind of like the online directories, people using phone books to kind of like navigate and browse and discover the internet. And my friend Matt told me like he remembers having this phone book at the the library computer on the side, and this was how he kind of discovered the internet. And of course, that at that point is like was any website, because like people are just creating these websites, but how do you link them together, and like where do you find them? And when you don't have Google and you don't have social media, how do you actually find things? You created list. Then I also learned about like this. There's this guy called Richard Liwai Huang who's like now collecting all these, because there are people all around the world did this. So you have like in all languages, you have these like yellow pages of the internet, and he's now making a collection. He's digitalizing it. I think it's on pastinter.net, and where you can kind of
Wow.
like search around them. And it's like it's a really fun play. And I think for us, of course, it was also a little bit. There's a lot of talk about how bad the internet is, and like I think generally speaking, I quite like the internet still, and I think there are a lot of good stuff. At least it's like when people say the internet is bad, then I would just like them to check some of these sites in this book, and then we can talk afterwards. And then you can say maybe the internet is both bad and good, but that's fine. Like I just like we cannot kill the internet just yet.
Right, like the internet is big, and it's big and capacious, and it's going to have a lot of stuff. And so some of that stuff you'll like, some of the stuff you
exactly.
Right, the point of like having something very, very large. And you were saying like it's in the early '90s there were these different books, but I think also during that time period when the internet was new, like there was that sense of like, yeah, the internet was good and fun and weird and wild and interesting. And I don't know how conscious or deliberate this was, but like with the internet phone book, was there a sense of trying to say, like, it still is like that. We can kind of use some of that early '90s aesthetic of like these physical books to also show that not only can we recapture some of that excitement of the '90s, but it's still around. Like, was that done deliberately?
Very much so.
Okay.
I think for us, like really one of the core ideas is to remind people that the internet is what we make it, trying to challenge people to like use it for other ways. And I think personally, I'm quite, if not angry, I'm at least fed up with like the narratives of like the dark forest of the internet and the dead internet. And it's not that there cannot be merits to these, but even if the diagnosis is correct, I find that it shouldn't be the prescriptions on how to go forward. So like say, if everything is bad on the internet, the solution should not be like to hide up in our own private spaces, but it should be like, how can we refight this energy? Like, how can we reclaim this public space? Because in many ways, the internet is such a incredible publishing technology that basically allows anyone from anywhere to do something and put it on the internet. Also to your point about like how it was in the early '90s, like how it was kind of seen as exciting, right? There was Safari, it was web browsing, it was web surfing, like everything was kind of explorative, and like internet escape. It was kind of exciting. Everything that was foreign was seen as something to be discovered. Basically, a stranger was a friend you haven't met yet, while now it's kind of like everything on the internet that you haven't seen becomes, this guy's going to troll me or this guy's going to trick me. And I think there's a little bit of like, yes, there are also a lot of very kind people out there still, and let's figure out how to navigate between those.
And this is, I mean, one of the things in my book, The Magic of Code, it's, and even broader than the internet, like computing was, right, this fun and exciting thing, and it doesn't necessarily need to be viewed as like big tech is kind of destroying us all. And yeah, those things are fair concerns, but going back to what you're saying, like the internet's not necessarily just good or bad, it's just big and there's lots of stuff there and you can find what you want. I feel like with computing more broadly, it can be like you feel like you're being controlled by the algorithm, but it can also just be a whole bunch of like weird things. I don't know, like Creative Code and SimCity and fractals and all this other kind of fun stuff. And I feel like there needs to be more of a movement of explaining to people and like trying to kind of like rekindle that sense of wonder and delight when it comes to computing and the internet and tech more broadly, because it's so easy to get like shunted into these very pessimistic or kind of dystopian versions of what everyone else is saying.
And I mean, I think absolutely agree. And I think like we are also at a stage, especially with technology and the internet, and looking back at sort of like venture funding, which has been a real vehicle for driving technology development. I think we are at a point where we also do need to show it rather than explain it, because otherwise we get back into this constant conversation, like, is it good, is it bad? But I think at this stage, we actually need to show it. So we, like, if we say that the internet is also good, we need to take people to a side that tells something for them. And I find like this first book, I think we still stay quite on the meta level, discussing about what's possible of websites. But I would be quite inspired by like one of my favorite internet projects is the HTML review by Max and Shelby, which is like a wonderful exploration of what can literature be in the browser. And like they have one of these submission criteria for when they accept pitches is that it should not be about the internet. So it's like, it needs to be like, you need to use the format of the web and the browser, to talk about something else than the internet, because it becomes otherwise very self-referential. And I find like this is where we are. Like I need to talk with people on the street, and then I hear that they really like trees. Then I need to show them my friend Elliot's site that is 1minutepark.tv that takes you to different parts all around the world. So you kind of like, you need to meet people in their interest and niches. And maybe this is again also going back to the 90s and like the whole hobby internet, uh, where it was like much more people just pursuing different passions and interests and kind of just like doing that without sort of commercial intent or promotional understanding.
And when you're saying like it needs to be more than just like people who are excited about the internet talking about the internet, like I feel like I noticed the same kind of thing in the in like the computational tools for thought movement, where it's like the people who are most excited about tools for thought, what are they using these tools for thought for? It's to talk and think about tools for thought. And it's very, very self-referential. And you're like, no. These are the things that should be used for scientific research or writing or other kinds of things. And they are. But I feel like by and large, it's this very kind of insular community. And so I love this idea of trying to kind of give people a sense of what is really out there. I also like the fact that, I mean, and obviously, like gesturing back towards the moment in like the 90s when it's kind of very early, I think that's good because it kind of gives people a sense of like, oh, like there was this moment and we can maybe rekindle it. But one of my concerns is just trying to, because anytime you're kind of talking about a moment in the past, you're kind of like, it's always this like mythical golden age. And you're like, oh, it was once really good then. How do we kind of recapture that kind of thing? And I feel like though, one of the things you're doing with this book and kind of the movement of just like thinking about the poetic web is not quite saying, oh, like, let's kind of go back to that time. But it's more like saying like that kind of thinking more broadly is still possible, but you're still kind of doing things in a very, very different sort of way. You're not just, it's not just nostalgia of like trying to make websites that look like the 90s, like blinking and flashing and spinning text or whatever it is. It's more than that. It's kind of saying like, it's much more about the feeling that you're trying to recapture. And in the same way that like people who are making like 8-bit art, it's like much more like it's kind of harkening back to kind of a golden age. Is that the right way to think about this kind of thing?
I mean, I would like to believe. I mean, I feel like you kind of articulated very well. Like, I think for me, it's more about like I try to describe what it is that I want to keep alive, and I think it always end up being some sort of like play on the spirit. So it's like it's the spirit of the web. Like it's not a specific website, it's not a specific creator, but it's like this possibility of the web that lends itself for publishing and connecting and linking with others. And for me, I think it comes down to how the web was formative in a way that I grew up in a smaller town. And then there are two sort of like, wow, the world can be like this memories that I ingrained myself. One was like starting in university and meeting other people who cared about philosophy and business. And then but the one before that was like suddenly like, oh, there's the internet. I can log in here and then I can participate in a very random niche dialogue about this bicycling fictional game. And I can spend my whole like days on this, right? And it's like, this is completely outside of my immediate physical realm. And like those conversations that stem from that, I think always for me seem very important and something that I remember a lot. And this is not to diminish anything that is physical or any like other ways, but I do find that the web is just a very interesting ecosystem environment to kind of explore, expand.
And so in addition to having lots and lots of websites in the book, there's also a whole bunch of essays. Were the essays chosen to kind of evoke the kinds of things you're talking about? What was the selection process for the essays? Because I think all, if not most of the essays, they're reprints of things that people have kind of written over the past several years and then putting them kind of in the print medium of the phone book.
Yeah, everything is intentionally like reprinted, like so remediated. So all of it is from the web. So in this sense, like the whole book is things that were already existing on the web, which is on the point, like the people and the websites already on the web, all the essays already on the web. The book itself is coded. So we wrote it in HTML and CSS and sent it to the printer using Control P. So everything is a website and lived as a website. And there's nothing new in that, right? It's like the whole thing that is new is just putting it all together and kind of giving it a cover, I guess. But yeah, to your point of like how we chose the essays it's of course like we have intentions of what we wanted people to think. Like, so the idea was like to place this book in bookshops and also hopefully meet people who could be interested in some of the conversations that I find are happening within the internet or the niche internet I like kind of like frequent. And I think people go to independent bookshops and read books in generally are quite alike to the people that I meet when I'm talking about the websites. So I thought like, okay, what do I need these people to know? What essays could help them understand how I think about the web. There are 10 essays in, and each of them are a bit different and kind of try to evoke different things. There's some like a bit more nerdy, like which I assume that someone who has never been on the web one really understand, like Gary Ing's like a view source web, which is basically just an essay dedicated to like the inspector tool and like just reading other people's code, which I assume is a little bit further away. But then there's also someone like Laurel Swolls, like that seminal essay originally published in the Creative Independent, saying like my house at a website next to a shifting river of knowledge. What could yours be? Which is like a super long title, but it's like a really nice essay that asks us to think about our websites from different metaphors. And in that way makes us realize that maybe the website is not just a portfolio site, or it's not just like somewhere where you want to get attention, but could be anything that you actually imagine it.
And I would say I'm related to like, yeah, the inspector tool, or in like certainly like back in like the early web, like viewing source, like that was the way you learned about how HTML worked. But it wasn't, I feel like it wasn't that hidden of a tool. Like it was just like everyone did that, I imagine, because that was one of the few things you could do with websites, and also just kind of made it much more democratized.
It was also easier to read the code back in the days, because it's like, it was much more semantic.
Mess, yeah.
Try to go in and like inspect Facebook. I mean, and I think, of course, on this, there's always like the question of literacy and like participation. I think for me, like one thing I do kind of want to play on also from the 90s is that the bar participation. So I find like a lot of like, to do a website, we have these expectations that it has to be like looking in a certain way. And I do want to break that down, because like in the end of the day, a website is just like some text on a file that is being rendered on a browser, right? And there are like always these great websites, like this is a motherfucking website. If you Google that, there will be many, which is just like different plays of like a text saying that this is a motherfucking website, where it's just like text and the domain name works. That's it. We can do all this kind of like fancy code, like that does all these great things, and we can make something very complicated. But in the end of the day, we can also make something very simple, and something very simple done intentionally can have a great value for someone.
And even just beyond websites that are simple, I feel like as websites became slicker and more professional, they often look very similar. And so it's not even just like, oh, like it just, the bar is higher to make like a website, or people perceive it that way, but websites all kind of look the same. And I think people have looked at like how, and there's certain fads and fashions. And so websites kind of change, and then they all kind of look the same, and they all look a different way, but then suddenly all the same again. And I imagine part of what you're trying to also show is that it's not even like, oh, you can make things that are simple, but there's no one way to make what a website looks like. Websites, it's really just, it's a canvas. Like it's like the same thing of like, I give you a piece of paper and you can draw on it. That doesn't mean everyone's drawing the same thing, or everyone's drawing the same kind of like same looking kind of thing. You can draw anything. And I imagine what you're trying to say is, no, it's the same thing with the web. A website is really just a canvas, and it can be anything. And so, yeah, trying to highlight all these different kinds of sites is probably as a way of like expanding. Okay, like here's a whole suite of ways of what websites can look like.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, it's like a lot of it, like you have kids, right? And they draw, and it's not about if it's a good drawing or bad drawing, but they're drawing. That's what you want to see, right? And then you like see them evolve, and it's like as they evolve, all of it is like exciting, right? And I think it's a lot the same. And then I think like we just need to have a spectrum and to kind of like accept that it can look so different, also based on your capabilities, what you're grown up with. Like, do you have like, are you 100 rabbits that live on a sailing boat and like use their like access the internet from a very old computer using Firefox that is like not rendering any JavaScript, right? It's like their websites are gonna look different, and even though that they are very technical adept. And I think that's, for me, it's very exciting, and I think that's something I always kind of want to, more than kind of judging is this a good or bad thing, it's just like, okay, but what do you want, right? Like it's like the question to your child is like what did you want to? How do you like it? What are you thinking about it? And that's more exciting than actually figuring out, is this good or bad? And we can let like museums or whatever decide the other part. Yeah.
And especially with the phone book also, I mean, as a way of kind of, I think, demonstrating, right, there's all different ways of doing things. There's a number of categories that you put the websites in kind of to show, I think, sort of the sheer breadth of different kinds of websites, especially personal websites. What are the different categories? How did you settle on the different categories as well?
So the categories evolved from this map that we actually were making in the bookshop, or I made, I guess, but I worked with Elliot on the design of it. And these are basically just like, the map represents different conversations around the internet that I kind of feel like point into something very interesting. So there can be like a whole area around ecology, which is something that not just online is very interesting, but across every discipline, like people start to understand that we need to think about things in the relationship to others. And of course, this is also a conversation that is happening within the internet. Like the very straightforward, like what is the size of a website? There's something called the Green Web Foundation, just kind of like finding standards of like, how can you make websites that are low weight and therefore can not be such a burn in sending the data, but also like a bit more experimental, such as like something like a guy called, like they are called AWS, Austin Wade Smith, which is a funny abbreviation for what they're doing, but they're basically exploring the feral web. So basically like how things cannot be designed from a very linear, very sort of straightforward approach, but kind of much more embrace and embedded the design language. And they do sort of experiments of like, they basically had different windows, and each window would open depending on different weather conditions where the server was hosted. So if it was like raining, you could enter this window. And if it was like wind from north, you could go this way. And it's just basically like reassessing like how does the website respond to where it is? And all of that would be framed within ecology. But so in the end, we had like, I don't know, it's like 10 or 12 different themes that somehow broadly categorize different conversations of the internet. And when we made the open call for people to submit their websites, they had to pick one of these different categories. On the side note, I think we need to do this a little bit different because it became a little like as a like a function right now. These like we use them to divide the book, which we felt was very cute, and I do find it quite cute. But the problem is when you need to find a website of, let's say, Sam, I would actually need to know in what category you are in before I can find you. Otherwise, I need to go through all of the categories, and we realized that that's like we need the lookup function, which we didn't kind of make.
Well, I remember, when I first got the internet phone book, I was like, oh, I'm gonna go find my own website, and I had forgotten what category I had chosen for myself. It took me a little while to kind of find myself, which is right. I would get going back to kind of a phone book, right? Then if the ultimate feature of the phone book is making it easy to look people up, it makes it more difficult. But that just means that there has to be more issues and more additions. So that's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely a lot of things we learned. We also didn't when we didn't have like a responder to people when they submitted the website. So they basically filled out this form for some people that they have no idea who were. And then 1 year later, they get an email, which for 90% ended in spam, saying that the internet phone book is now here. Check if you are in it. And then people are like, I don't remember having submitted this. There are certain things where we're like, okay, maybe we need to improve a little bit at the operations, but it also has a charm. Then one thing I think that we did quite well was like the numbering system in the book, because we were like, okay, how do we actually link in the directory with all these websites? How do we kind of link that back to the web? And of course, people could like look up Sam and then they could see sort of like your URL, but we thought it would be quite tedious to sit and type it in. So we came up with this like dialing interface, which is basically like a phone system. So all the sites in the directory, they got like a phone number, and then we made like a subpage, internetphonebook.net/dial. And there you can put in this number and then you can call your website. And I think just like this it's so silly in many ways, but it's a quite nice interface between text, like physical books, and the web. And I almost wish that every book that were coming out, like instead of citations, like where you go back to the reference list and then you see like this very long URL because it's like newyorktimes.com/badada, and then like the date and then the title of the story. If you could just like go into whatever book, like title of the book.net/references, and you could just put in the different numbers and you would go to it, would be much more efficient.
Oh, I love that idea. Although I imagine, given sort of just the advances in optical character recognition, you might just be able to take a picture of a URL and then it's able to read it. But I still like the idea of kind of making, and so even just for any book, like where there's references and bibliography, where not only is there a website for the book, but there's kind of this relationship to the reader, so that when they go on there, they're able to kind of find the things they need, and it kind of just closes the loop in some nice ways.
So one more story is, because we did this dial, then basically we get references to people who are dialing, because people are using this dial thing to visit sites. So when people sit with the book and they're dialing in numbers, then the people's website, if they have like analytics installed, they will see that it comes from this. And there was some guy who was like writing us and saying that, hey, am I in this internet phone book? Because I see that I get a lot of traffic from it, which like is interesting because it means that people are doing it. If we would not have used that interface and people would not have seen it, he would never have realized that he actually was in this internet phone book, because he would just have been another random visitor, which is like a strange like side effect of this. Oh yeah, but like things we learned, like one thing, like we self-publish, and I wanted an ISBN number. I wanted the book to be as real as possible. So I wanted to have an ISBN number. I wanted to have a barcode. And then since I live here in Greece, then yeah, ISBN numbers are for free, which is amazing. But since we self-publish, you cannot, like, in terms of the copyright, then I would basically need all who has text in it to be written as publisher, which is like, I could then ask everyone who has an essay plus everyone who submitted their websites to basically be listed as publishers of this book, because like otherwise I wouldn't be allowed to do it, which meant
Interesting.
because like it was like self-publishers, then the authors would be everyone. And I couldn't have just writing myself and my friend Elliot. I would then need to have everyone who has something in the book. So that was a little bit of an issue. But then we learned about the ISSN, which is the periodical. The authorship is just assigned to the title, which means that then everything was solved. But we did have to place 2 copies at the National Libraries of Greece, which then also means that suddenly like we have this beautiful effect of like, just I went there myself. They were very sweet at this office and they were very helpful. And then when I finally were ready with the book, I went there to give them this internet phone book because they were very curious about the poetic web. So I wanted to go in person. And then I was just like, here is a book with all my friends inside. And now it's going to live in the archives of Greece, whatever, how long they can manage it, which, yeah, I think is very cool.
No, that's amazing. And what was the reaction when you kind of gave them this thing?
I mean, like the thing is like, I ended up chatting a lot with the ISBN people, and they were really interested. Like, so I was on the phone with them a lot of time trying to solve this, and they became very friends. So I would call like, oh, hi, Kristoffer. And then one time it's like, okay, it was really getting messy. So I was like, okay, can I come and visit you? And then I went visiting, and then she just spent like 20 minutes asking me about the poetic web before we got to talk about the book, which I was like, librarians are like the best people. But then when I went to hand it in, it was again the ISBN people who were there. So it was a little bit of it was a little bit sad because, of course, it was like, hey, it's here, it's nice, it's good. But then they were just like, yeah, you can place it there over on this desk, and then you will get an email when they have registered it. It was like anticlimactic for like how I kind of build up the story in my brain. But yeah, actually, I think like this whole like books is a completely different ecosystem. I mean, you know that, right? Like, it's like we have been doing websites for a long time, and then suddenly you do a book and it's a small print run, but like there exists this whole ecosystem around it, which I think is really motivating to realize. And like you have like libraries, you have like archives, you have like bookshops, you have like critics, like you have this whole thing that keeps the conversation going somehow and levels it up. And I find, if anything, I would love to copy some of that for the web. Like, how can you have more sort of like a richer ecosystem that supports and built up around creating websites outside of maybe commercial context, because there it exists.
I mean, because one of the interesting things with books is like there does feel a certain amount of permanence to them, while like websites, I mean, they probably can actually exist for a very, very long time, and the Internet Archive is doing a really good job of preserving websites, but there is kind of like a ephemerality to a lot of them. And so is it just around kind of like, because books feel a little bit more permanent, there's also this ecosystem around there in terms of like promoting them and kind of making sure that they're being seen by lots of different people. Like, okay, what are the aspects of the physical book publication process or promotion process or whatever it is that really resonated or you found interesting and kind of complementary to like the website work?
The thing is, like, I'm just discovering this, but it's like I had like libraries write about if they can get a copy for their archive. Like, it's like I've never done a website where a library would say, hey, can we store it, right? Like, and I know that some of the websites are archived at the Internet Archive, but they don't send like a sweet little email saying that, hey, we just crawled your website, good job. like I mean, there are just things where it's like there's something that has been developed for hundreds of years and have a whole ecosystem going there. And I think that is like feels very rich because you can do some real experimentation. I know like publishing is also has its own issues, so it's not romanticizing it. But for me, like the first step in feels very motivating. And like suddenly I would see like people, we received the book, also people who I respect a lot, and then they would review the book, right? And they would make like either a blog post or like an Instagram post, and they would kind of write about it and kind of judge it. And I love that. You don't do that with the websites, or maybe once in a while you get a link, but it's like, here's like people just act differently because it's a book. And
Right.
yeah,
Right. There's not really like web page launch parties or
no,
or
right.
like web page reviews. Although I guess HTML review is kind of like that. But you're right. Like being able to take some of that from the book world. Oh, I love that idea. Yeah,
I mean, I think
that's
it's
fun.
just like such a, I mean, back to your notion around that, reminding people of how vast an ecosystem it is. I went to this talk with the artist and writer James Bridle, and they spoke about living on this island outside of Athens called Aegean, and their experiences going snorkeling and then seeing this invasive species, which was, there's some specific fish, I forgot like the name right now, but it like really been spreading the last few years, and now it's in all around the Mediterranean Sea. And then was I first afraid of, oh, this is going to be another story about like how invasive species are like killing the local ecosystems, la da 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 da, and like everything is bad. And I always react a little bit to that, because I find like in the end of the day, invasive species are like migrants, and we all migrants in one way or another. And then James Ryder goes into this whole conversation around that actually this fish has not, like, so far there's been no research that show that this fish should have limited any other species, like any native species, because in fact, like the Mediterranean Sea is what ecologists would call an underdeveloped ecosystem. And it had me thinking around like the internet is just like an endless, constant, underdeveloped ecosystem, that there will always be more possibilities for what the internet can be, and that you can always create your own constellations. And I think that's like, that like really got me thinking. It's like, okay, we don't need to take any sort of like any current constellation as this is how it is. Like, so if you're tired of social media, you really don't need social media. They can still exist, but there are so much, like it's an endless canvas for what's possible of creating all sort of smaller ecosystems. Yeah, that got me really excited. And I was like, okay, this is how I have to think about it. I just need to like expand the, like, not only expand, it's not one ecosystem, it's like creating multiple ecosystems of the internet, basically.
Love that. I love this. Like the internet as an underdeveloped ecosystem. Right. It also shows that like, when we think about like the story of the internet, right, it's not 90s or now, or kind of a story of like wonder to like being the raw materials for an algorithm or whatever it is. It's like the story's not even close to over. Like there's still so many things we can be doing, and right, and I don't know what the answer is. It sounds like you don't know what the answer is either, but we just want more people trying all these different kinds of things, having lots of different ecosystems.
Most people who are interested in the internet, they kind of have this idea that it's a military technology that came out of like elite universities. It's like, and it's not that this is not true, but it's really hard to, for example, imagine the internet without citation systems in books, because they are literally links. Or some people would say, yeah, the looms, like, because then you have the binary. Like, there are all these other stories that you can kind of amplify. And I'm not saying that everything is because of book citation systems, but I'm just saying like, that as a process or like as a product of human development definitely enabled the possibilities that we now have this thing we call the internet. And I think like rewriting or like broadening our awareness also kind of give different ancestors to it. Because when we say that the internet is a military technology, suddenly it's like something about like winning over each other. It's kind of like scarcity. It's like, it's all these kind of like war kind of language. But if you like reframe it either in magic as you're doing, or like in citation, it can become more abundant. It can be more like meeting the others as something very exciting, which like for me seems super valuable to do.
Right. It's like, it can be this like very pro-social or like non-zero sum kind of experience. And right, as opposed to kind of, like the like you win, I lose, we're competing for attention or whatever it is. In addition to the internet phone book, are you working on other projects kind of around this idea of like the internet as an underdeveloped ecosystem that should actually be developed more? Like what are there other current things you're playing with in that space?
I mean, yes, but I think I'm reaching like where I want to do my own things, because I feel like I really want to do the internet phone book for quite some years. And I think there's a lot of momentum around that. I have a conference, I have a newsletter, I have an award. Like I'm already kind of reaching a point where I'm like,
right, you have your own little ecosystem.
like I think it's also others. So I'm spending quite some time actually figuring out like how to better support like these kind of projects that I like. It's early formation, so maybe if we talk in a year from now, then it's like similar to with the phone book. But like we call this like the Living Web Institute, and basically the idea is there to figure out how can we help like maintain experimentations with websites. And one of the just the simple issues is that a lot of like money or resources that goes into technology goes into whatever is defined as emerging. So like a few years ago, all of us were doing virtual reality projects, then all of us did Web3 projects. Now everyone is doing AI projects. And the thing is like, in between somewhere, you can once in a while like hide what you're doing and do like your own things, even that this shifting sort of focus of emerging technology. But what I would really like to do is just like, okay, the web is a very valuable technology. It's not perfect, but it's very valuable. How do we keep that going? Not necessarily only on the technical side, but also on the social side. So how do we kind of like ensure that there are communities where people meet and experiment with the web, and in that way ultimately keep it alive? Because I think like Internet Archive and all these projects, they do a great job of doing like the code to code. Like you can see the code, but in the end of the day, for me, the website is like, it's like showing an image of people that you don't know. So it's like, what were the thoughts around this? Like you need people like that kind of tells the stories in multiple ways. Then these are the entry points to it, right? Because otherwise it's like, it's only for really like archaeologists or like people really going into like deep research of early web or whatever. But I think it won't become for common people. Like I think we need stories.
And then it reminds me when you're saying of like people always kind of pursuing the new, and sometimes at the expense of like the things that are actually well explored. It reminds me of the phrase. There was a phrase by an engineer at Nintendo called, it was like lateral thinking through weathered technology or lateral thinking through withered technology, where the idea is like rather than trying to build technologies based on the like most cutting edge advances, which are often going to be brittle and kind of iffy and kind of and sometimes faddish, and they're not necessarily going to hold up to repeated use. Instead, use things that are well understood and then recombine them in novel ways. And so this was kind of the origin of like the Game Boy. It was none of the technologies inside the Game Boy were really cutting edge, but you combine them in some fun ways. And this thing was incredibly resilient and it was amazing. And I feel like there's something there with like the web, not only preserving some of these stories, but also saying like the web is this really, really well understood technology. And going back to what we're saying of like these different ecosystems or different ways of building sites, like there's not any one way to do it. And so just try to think of new novel ways of how people can use the web. And I feel like, yeah, being able to really understand how people have done this and kind of give people a true sense of like the breadth of different types of websites can allow people to really do this kind of like lateral thinking through the weathered technology of HTML and the web and the internet.
I mean, I absolutely agree. And I mean, there's this wonderful book called The Shock of the Old, which is just like basically like showing how it's the old technologies that run the world and not new technologies. And I think like when I was reading it, the one example that just stuck to my mind was like the Apollo mission that actually was successful. Like that has I think it was like 6 or 7 or 8 year design freeze, which means that when they successfully landed on the moon, they haven't had any new technologies in for the last 6, 7 or 8 years, right? And it's just like you can do things with old technologies that probably are both safer and smarter. I would say though, it's like for me, it's never the point really that it has to be old either. I think it's just like this new old shouldn't really be the thing. Like
Right.
You shouldn't decide the funding. Is this a new technology or not? You should figure out, does this project, this website, this technology, does it offer something that is relevant for the people in it beyond the newness or oldness? I think
right. And
for me, it's
and is it like an appropriate technology for this kind of thing? And I feel like people try to shoehorn either the old thing for the sake of the old or the new for the sake of the new, and without thinking whether or not it's actually an appropriate use.
I mean, there's this whole appropriate technology movement, which I think makes a lot of sense, right? It's like the starting point for working with technology. I mean, you could also say, does it give a sense of awe or wonder? Like, I think that would also be great. Like, I mean, it's like, and sometimes that because it's new, but then whatever, like, but then start from that. Like, say, like, I want people to feel awe. That's a very novel and beautiful thing to approach technology with, right? If that's what you do and you think your trick is to play with AI, do that. Like, I'm fine with that. I'm not against it. I just don't think that this should start from the AI. Like we need to start from somewhere else when we kind of do new things.
And then you were saying also in terms of both like the phone book and some of these other projects, like trying to kind of find support for these kinds of things. And one of the interesting things with the phone book, and there are advertisements within it. Like there's not a lot, but there are some, and like there's clearly sponsors of the internet phone book. How did you find the kinds of appropriate companies or organizations that would actually like that kind of bought into this into this view, which I mean is amazing. I want there to be, every company should be a sponsor of this kind of thing. But yeah, how did you find them?
Yeah, just email me at no. The phone book is like a culmination of at least like 5 or 7 years work within this stream, right? Like, so I think I see it's more like putting things together in a book form that I've done for a long time. And by doing the same things for a long time, specifically writing around the poetic web, also means that you meet a lot of people. And I think maybe 1 or 2 of the ads were cold sale, but by far it was like people that in some ways I had conversation with before, and like know something in them resonates with the web and they want to support that. And we ask for so little that they were like, yeah, sure, here, like, you guys are silly, but take our money, right? I think it's like,
It's amazing though, where
yeah,
you found the fellow travelers,
exactly.
who kind of
I think there's a lot to
understand
be
it.
done within this. Like, speaking of the ecosystem, because I find like, I actually think ads are like, for a long time, I would say that ads were bad. And it's like really like what makes the internet worse. But I actually think, I mean, in many ways, like ads are money gifts that kind of allows certain things to exist that otherwise would probably be difficult to exist. And I do find it a bit sad that there are a lot of technology companies, like small and medium sized, that actually do spend some money on ads. It's not a lot, like in a per company basis, but accumulated, it becomes a lot. And right now their options are basically just like paying like the big companies that like they're fighting against the big companies, but they're also paying them the money. And I think it would be really interesting to figure out how to build more relationship with these smaller companies and channel their money into different like nice community oriented projects. Like there's HTML Day coming up August 2nd, which probably has already been if when it's air, which is a beautiful initiative by Elliot, who I did the book with, and Laura Swolst, where they all around the world have people gather in parks to sit and write HTML by hand, which is like as much just talking about the internet. And I think last year there were like 22, 24 cities worldwide. I think this year it's already at 30. And this year then
Amazing.
they added sponsors, and like so a few companies pay a few money, and it just helps Elliot and Laurel dedicate a little bit time to organize it. And I think this is like, I would love that people with these kind of projects, they were able to get small amounts of funding, because it really makes these projects continue beyond a little bit like the initial love of, like everyone like get a new idea, we fall in love, we kind of put ourselves in it. And then at some point it's just really difficult and you don't get money for it and your child is hungry. And then you're like, okay, I should actually earn some money. And then I forget about my side projects. So I do think that there needs to be a little bit more funds in these kind of like initiatives.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, the fact that there was 8 or 10 companies or whatever, well, I don't remember the number, that advertised and sponsored the Internet Phone Book. I mean, some of them I was familiar with, some of them I'm not, but like I think I looked up almost every single one because I just found it so amazing that like these are the companies that are like, that really get it. And certainly, and maybe I'm not the only one, but I think right, the people who are in part of this poetic web and kind of get it, when they see that there are companies that are also kind of thinking about the same kind of thing, it can be it can be kind of exciting. So
Yeah, I mean,
right. So
I
I
think
think
it's
there
yeah.
are ways of making it a much more positive experience as opposed to right, like they kind of like the digital internet where ads are this kind of very hated thing, or people don't necessarily like, they try to avoid it, or it's not really the same kind of experience.
I mean, I think so, and I mean, I think roughly we had this idea of organic softwares, which is like one term as one of the advertisers kind of came up with, Kinopio, which is basically like similar to like how do you grow companies or what model do you use? And I think often it becomes venture funded companies, and then like he kind of makes the point that maybe we should kind of look into more like how organic produce is grown and it's like done from different values than scale. So it's not industrial agriculture, but it's actually something that feels much more artisanal. And I think there is such a strong correlation between the people caring for the poetic web or the web in general and people running these companies. And I think these people running these companies also really want to see the web, like they understand like there's a symbiosis there that we can kind of support. And I would love to bring these people together more, because I also think like they could just like these companies should just do their own web rings, right? Like they should have on their websites, like they should have in the bottom, like you should shop from, like, do you need the mailing service? Go there. Do you need like, because they're not competing against each other, right? They are kind of like in many ways, they are a guild. Like they could kind of like, they should kind of go together because like the real struggle is like the very, very big companies that kind of like just buy them out. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Um, one thing you also mentioned earlier is you were talking about trying to kind of get the Internet Phone Book into bookstores and kind of get people to pick it up, play with it kind of like physically and be exposed to the kind of this world that they might not have otherwise been exposed to. I mean, have you been successful in getting it into lots of bookstores?
Yeah, I mean, we had to stop because we didn't have enough copies. Like, so, I mean,
That is a great problem.
yeah, I did study business, so I kind of knew like if I send an email to a bookstore and I've never published a book, they're not going to take me very serious. So, but then I tested the idea saying that, hey, we are working, and it was 1 year ago before, like 1 year before we were ready with it. I just wrote bookstores saying that, hey, I'm doing this internet phone book. This is why I do it. And you can get 5 free copies. Just if you want, let me know. And then some of them wrote back, yeah, we're sure. Let's give it a chance. Can you ship it? And I'm like, oh no, we haven't even designed it yet. And then, so I kind of just told them, you will hear from me in the fall. And then it was spring. And then I wrote to them, hey, now the books are ready. They're on the way, because I felt like I shouldn't kind of like ask them if they still want them, because like who is this strange dude, right? So
Right.
I just sent them to the bookstores that agreed, and then just when I shipped them to them, I just sent them, hey, they're coming now. This is the shipping number. We're gonna like release it on this and this date. But then it actually sold very fast. So like there was like one Pro QM, which was in Berlin. It was a very nice bookstore, and they sold all 5 like within 1 or 2 days opening, and then they ordered, which they then paid for 10 more, and the 10 more sold in like 1 week. Like it was like, yeah, it has really been being picked up in the bookshops, and like we are constantly being contacted by bookshops that want to keep it. Yeah, which is I need to work a bit smarter on this for issue 2, but yeah.
But that is amazing to hear. Oh,
yeah.
that's fantastic.
And I love bookshops because I mean, the thing is like they have such a big value in a small ecosystem, like a local environment, like a street. Is like just the curation of the books, the placement of the books, and kind of like ensuring that people get exposed to something they would never see, right? Because I could never expose random people in Berlin or Amsterdam or wherever it has been to the internet phone book, but like just by having these people that build up their own audiences of people that are interested in different conversations. I mean, I think that has a very big value. And yeah, some of them have very strange margins. So we are trying to improve.
Well, that's fantastic. I guess my last question is, I mean, so let's say either people listening to us talk or people who have like looked at the internet phone book, they kind of buy into this idea, okay, that there should be more of this poetic web and people should really be exploring and building websites, but they've never built websites before. How would you guide someone who wants to make their own website, either just about themselves, about some specific project or topic that they're really passionate about? I mean, because I think there have been tools to kind of make it easier and kind of democratize website creation. What would you say to someone who wants to make a website but has never done it before?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think people should just try different ways, right? Like, and then see what they like. There's m.page, which is a nice little treating the website as a canvas. You can move things around. One of the sponsors of the book, that's why I recommend it. One of the website that I did myself was a spreadsheet. Like it was the first website that I did that kind of traveled around the internet. Wilderness.land is still online, which is just a map made of a spreadsheet. And what you can do there, you can just publish the spreadsheet to the web, and then you can take that code and put it in whatever, and then you have a website. Otherwise, I think just like try to chat a little, like write with whatever AI you're using and saying that you're going to only make a website using HTML and CSS because that's fairly easy to understand. And then just start to figure out what you want and try to understand what it's suggesting. And then, of course, start something very simple of just saying that, hey, I just want a website about my dog, and then figure out what do you want there. Maybe you want an image, because the thing is like, it's very simple to understand like what is the code for putting an image on a website. So you can get a very good understanding if you're just sitting and doing with AI. Of course, you can also meet people there, coding communities all around the world. But for me, I think when I knew nothing, I felt that was a little bit intimidating. And yeah, personally, I find it much easier to just sit and try around.
I love that. That is, those are great suggestions. And I hope that someone listening to that, at least one person, will be inspired.
Send us the website if you do. I love receiving websites.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much. This is a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. I love it.